Story hiding inside the oldest Christian Bible on earth. Not a rumor, not a theory, a chapter. A complete, detailed, historically verified chapter that survived in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible for over 1,600 years, while the Western Church kept it locked away from every believer who sat in a Sunday morning pew and wondered why God chose Noah. You have been told Noah was righteous. You have been told he found grace in the eyes of God. You have been told he built a boat and saved his family. What you were never told is what happened the night he was born. What you were never told is what his father saw. What you were never told is why that father ran out of the tent screaming in terror the moment he laid eyes on his own newborn son. That part of the story survived in one place, the Ethiopian Bible. Specifically in the Book of Enoch, chapter 106, a text that Western Christianity voted to remove in the year 364 AD at the Council of Laodicea. A text that Ethiopian Orthodox priests have been reading aloud in mountain monasteries every single year since 330 AD without interruption. That text is what we are reading today. And once you see what it says, you will never read the flood story the same way again. Before we open the text itself, you need to understand how this material reached the English-speaking world. For approximately 2 decades, a team of scholars was quietly funded to do something almost no Western institution had attempted. They traveled to Ethiopia. They worked directly with Ge'ez language specialists. They compared the Ethiopian manuscripts against the Aramaic fragments discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947. They cross-referenced ancient Jewish texts, early church writings, and Second Temple literature to build the most complete picture anyone in the modern West had assembled of what the original Book of Enoch actually said. The result of that research is now coming forward. And what it reveals about Noah, about the Nephilim, and about why the flood happened at all is not what your pastor taught you on Sunday morning. It is older than your church. It is older than Rome. It is older than the council that decided what you were allowed to read. Let us start from the beginning. Noah's father was a man named Lamech. Lamech was not royalty. He was not a prophet or a warrior king. He was a farmer descended from Seth, the third son of Adam, a man who walked carefully in the traditions his grandfather Enoch had established. He prayed at the appointed hours. He tended his land. He married a good woman and waited for children the way any man of his generation waited, with patience and simple hope. When his wife became pregnant, Lamech expected an ordinary child. What he received on the night of that birth broke every category his mind possessed. The Book of Enoch, chapter 106, preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible and confirmed by the Aramaic Genesis Apocryphon found at Qumran in 1947, gives 5 specific physical marks of the newborn Noah. 5 details, none of which appear in any Western Bible you have ever read. The first mark: his skin glowed white like snow. Not pale, not light-skinned. The Ge'ez word the Ethiopian scribes preserved carries a meaning closer to luminous, as if the flesh itself was producing light from within. This was not a medical condition. The text describes something that made the midwife step back and made the walls of the room catch a reflection that should not have been there. In the context of ancient Semitic culture, where families of that line carried olive and brown skin tones, a newborn radiating white light from its own body was not a curiosity. It was a sign, and everyone in that tent knew what sign it resembled. The second mark: his hair was long and white as wool. A newborn with a full mane of white hair, the color not of youth, but of extreme age, or something beyond age altogether. Something that did not belong to any child any of them had ever seen or heard described. The third mark: when he opened his eyes, the room filled with light like midday sun. A small stone dwelling, oil lamps flickering in corners, clay walls, woven mats, the ordinary surroundings of a Semitic birth in the ancient world. And then those eyes opened, and every shadow in the room disappeared. The text says the light was sustained. It was not a flash. It was not a reflection. The child's open eyes produced sustained, steady, solar-level illumination from a horizontal position on a midwife's cloth. Lamech pressed himself against the entrance of the tent. His wife wept. The midwife dropped what was in her hands. The fourth mark. The int is a word meaning he stood, not he was held up, not he was positioned by the midwife. The infant pushed himself upright on his own legs while the midwife was still preparing the swaddling cloth. His balance was adult. His posture was controlled. He met his father's eyes not from the horizontal of a cradled newborn, but from the vertical of a small standing person. Newborns do not stand. Every parent who has ever held a child in the first hour of life understands how physically impossible this detail is. And yet both the Ethiopian text and the Aramaic Dead Sea Scroll fragment record it the same way. He stood. The fifth mark. The infant opened his mouth and praised God. The Gez text is precise. He did not cry. He did not make the sounds of hunger or cold. He spoke. He praised the Lord of heaven with articulate words before he had ever been fed, before he had ever heard language spoken to him, before any developmental milestone that any pediatrician in any century would consider possible. His first breath became worship. His first sound was devotion. 5 marks, all 5 recorded in the Book of Enoch, all 5 confirmed in the Aramaic fragments from Qumran. None of them in your Genesis. None of them in any Bible printed by Rome or any tradition that descended from the Council of Laodicea. Here is where the story becomes deeply human. Lamech knew his tradition. Every parent in that generation did. The Watchers, those heavenly beings described in Genesis 6 as the sons of God who came down and took human wives, had been corrupting the human bloodline for generations. Their offspring carried specific traits: unusual height, unusual intelligence, unusual light, early speech, early physical development. Every single mark on his newborn son matched the descriptions of Nephilim contamination that had been passed down through his family since Enoch had first warned about the Watchers. And Lamech had been faithful. He had never strayed. He had never entertained anything beyond his own wife. He was a righteous man by every standard his culture had.
And yet here was a baby who looked like a child of the Watchers. The implication was devastating. Either his wife had been with an angelic being without his knowledge, which ancient law treated as a catastrophic contamination of the family line, or something was happening that was entirely beyond his framework to understand. He did not stay to sort it out. The text says he fled. The Hebrew root word used in the Genesis Apocryphon carries the meaning of urgent, desperate flight, not a thoughtful departure, not a measured walk to his father's house. He abandoned his wife in the hours after childbirth. He abandoned the midwife. He left a newborn baby unattended in the tent. He saddled his animal in the dark and rode through the night to find his father Methuselah. Think about the weight of that image. A man who waited 9 months for his firstborn son. A man who prayed for a healthy child. And when that child arrives, he takes one look and runs into the night, wondering whether he is obligated by ancient law to end the life of the infant himself. This is not mythology. This is a father in the worst moment of his life, caught between love and terror and tradition, with no language for what he has just seen. Methuselah was 969 years old. He was the son of Enoch, the prophet who had walked with God and been taken up without dying. He was the oldest human being in the recorded history of any.
Instead, he climbed onto a travel animal and rode for weeks to find his father Enoch at what the Ethiopian text calls the ends of the earth, a liminal region where the prophet dwelt in ongoing communion with God and the angels. The Ethiopian commentators describe the journey in detail: mountain passes where cold came quickly, salt plains that disorient travelers, valleys where water was scarce. The old man rode through all of it because his grandson Lamech had asked him one question: is this child mine? Is this child human? Or do I need to destroy him with my own hands? Methuselah knelt before his father Enoch and delivered the question. Enoch listened without interrupting. And then he answered. Enoch did not hesitate. He did not offer possibilities or qualifications. He spoke with the certainty of a man who had spent centuries in direct conversation with the God who made the child in question. He said, "The child did not come from the Watchers. The child is a sign from God." And then he said something that reframes the entire flood narrative, the entire Nephilim story, and the entire question of why God chose to preserve one family. He said, "The marks on this child are not the marks of Nephilim contamination. They are the marks of the first Adam."
The glow, the luminous skin, the eyes filled with light, the early speech, the upright posture. These were not signs of fallen angelic corruption. These were the original properties of humanity as God designed it before the fall in the Garden of Eden. Adam, in his original uncorrupted state, carried these qualities. Adam was made in the full image of God. That image included a luminosity, a brightness, that the fall had extinguished in every subsequent human being. Every generation since the garden had carried a diminished reflection of that original design. Every generation had been further corrupted, first by the fall itself, then by centuries of watcher contamination spreading through human bloodlines like a slow poison. But in Noah's line, somehow the original Adamic template had been preserved intact. Noah did not glow because he was part angel. Noah glowed because he was the last fully human being on earth. Genesis 6:9. You have read it 100 times. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations.
Western scholars have debated that phrase for centuries. Perfect in his generations? What does it mean? Morally perfect? Spiritually mature? Doctrinally correct? The Hebrew word is tamim. It appears throughout the Torah and carries a meaning not of moral excellence alone, but of completeness, intactness, unblemished quality. When it is applied to animals set apart for sacrifice, it means an animal with no defect, no mixture, nothing broken or compromised. Applied to Noah, it means exactly what the Ethiopian text explains. His bloodline carried no contamination from the Watcher corruption that had spread through every other family on earth. His genetic and spiritual inheritance was intact, unmixed, unbroken from Adam forward. That is why God chose him. Not because Noah was morally superior to every other human alive, not because Noah had achieved some spiritual height no one else had reached, but because Noah alone carried the unbroken Adamic line at a moment when every other human being on earth had been compromised by the Nephilim bloodlines spreading from the Watchers and their offspring.
The flood was not primarily an act of punishment. The flood was an act of preservation. God was not wiping out humanity because he hated humanity. God was clearing away a corruption so severe and so total that without intervention, the original human design would disappear from the earth entirely. Through Noah, the uncorrupted image of Adam would survive. Through Noah, every human being alive today descends from the one line that carried the original template intact. This is the teaching the Ethiopian church has preserved and read aloud every year for 1,600 years. This is the theology that makes the flood story make complete sense for the first time. And this is the chapter the Council of Laodicea voted to remove in 364 AD. The Council of Laodicea met in the year 364 AD. Their agenda included standardizing the biblical canon for churches under Roman influence. Their decisions were not universally evil. Many of them were pastoral attempts to protect young believers from speculative texts.
But the vote to exclude the Book of Enoch from the Western canon had a consequence no bishop in that room fully calculated. It removed the explanatory chapter for Genesis 6. It removed the backstory for Jude's quotation of Enoch in the New Testament. It removed the context for Revelation's imagery of fallen angels and bound spirits. And it removed chapter 106, the birth of Noah, the 5 marks, Lamech's terror, Methuselah's journey, Enoch's answer. Rome could enforce that decision across Europe, across North Africa under its control, across the churches of Asia Minor. Rome could not reach the highlands of Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had formally adopted Christianity in 330 AD, 34 years before the Council of Laodicea convened. Those 34 years of theological independence meant that when the council voted, Ethiopia was not listening. Ethiopian scribes kept copying the complete text. Ethiopian priests kept reading every chapter. Ethiopian monks kept teaching chapter 106 alongside Genesis 6 the way it was always meant to be taught, together as one continuous story. The mountain monasteries of Ethiopia became, without knowing it, the archive of what the Western Church decided to forget. For 1,600 years, while Western Christians struggled to explain what perfect in his generations meant, Ethiopian priests were reading the answer out loud every year in a language older than Latin. If every human being alive today descends from Noah, and Noah alone carried the uncorrupted Adamic bloodline through the flood, then every person walking the earth today carries a trace of that original design.
Every one of us is descended from the last man who bore the full image of Adam. You are not an accident. You are not a corrupted remnant. You are the continuation of a line God went to extraordinary lengths to protect, preserving it through the rejection of a father who ran in fear, through the exhausting journey of the oldest man who ever lived, through the answer of a prophet who walked with God, through the waters of a flood that destroyed everything that would have prevented your existence. That is the mercy hidden inside the flood story. That is the truth the Ethiopian priests never forgot. That is what the West lost in 364, and what careful research is now returning to the English-speaking world. The baby survived. The bloodline survived. And through that baby, you survived too, born thousands of years later, carrying in your body and your spirit the echo of an original human design that one council tried to make you forget was ever there. The next chapter of this story goes deeper still. Subscribe Sacred Depths for more.